Have you ever been dismissed, doubted, or laughed at for speaking your truth? When 15-year-old Marcus told his science class that his brother worked at NASA, the entire room, including his teacher, erupted in laughter. What they didn't know was that sometimes the truth is more extraordinary than fiction, and assumptions can blind us to the brilliant stars right in front of us. Watch how this powerful story unfolds and see why you should never judge someone's potential by your limited perspective. Dear viewer, if you are watching my story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you are watching right now, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published news stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. Marcus Johnson stood at the front of Ms. Whitfield's science classroom, trying to keep his hands from trembling as 24 pairs of eyes fixed on him. Career day presentations were nerve-wracking enough for any 15-year-old, but for Marcus, this moment meant everything. For as long as I can remember, I've wanted to be an astrophysicist, he began, his voice steadier than he felt. The mysteries of black holes, dark matter, and how galaxies form, these questions keep me up at night. From behind her desk, Ms. Whitfield peered over her reading glasses, her lips pressed into a thin line. In her 29 years of teaching at Westridge High, Eleanor Whitfield had developed a reputation for academic rigor and unforgiving standards. Her blonde hair was always perfectly styled, her clothing immaculate, as if to physically represent the order she demanded in her classroom. "And what specifically about astrophysics interests you, Marcus?" she asked, her tone carrying that familiar edge that made students' stomachs knot. Marcus straightened his shoulders. "The unknown, ma'am. The chance to discover things nobody has ever seen before." He gestured to the poster board beside him, covered with images of nebulae and star formations he'd printed at the library. "I've been studying the Jupyter programming language to analyze astronomical data, and self-taught, I presume?" Ms. Whitfield interrupted, one eyebrow raised. "Yes, ma'am. But my brother helps me sometimes. He works at NASA, in the Jet Propulsion Laboratory." The classroom fell silent for 2 heartbeats before erupting in poorly concealed snickers. From the back row, Tyler Martin let out an exaggerated, "So he does," prompting a wave of laughter. Ms. Whitfield's lips curled into a smile that never reached her eyes. "NASA, is it? And what does this brother do at such a prestigious organization? Janitor, perhaps?" Marcus felt heat rising in his cheeks. "No, ma'am. He's an aerospace engineer. He's working on the Europa Clipper mission right now." The laughter grew louder. Even Jasmine, who usually smiled at him in the hallways, was covering her mouth to hide her giggles. Ms. Whitfield stood up, smoothing her crisp beige slacks. "Marcus, while I appreciate imagination, this is a science classroom. We deal in facts, not fantasies." She turned to address the class. "This is precisely why proper academic credentials matter. They separate verifiable achievements from wishful thinking." Marcus stared at the floor, his throat tight with humiliation, unable to look up as Ms. Whitfield dismissed him back to his seat. "Maybe next time," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "stick to career aspirations that are a bit more realistic for someone from your background." As Marcus slumped into his chair, he knew what she really meant. People like him, from the east side of town, from a single-parent home, black, weren't supposed to reach that high. But what none of them knew was that his brother Mateusz had already proven that assumption wrong. If only they could see his brother now. "Hey, spaceman. Is your brother bringing his UFO to pick you up today?" Marcus kept his head down as he navigated the crowded hallway after school, Tyler's mocking voice following him like an unwelcome shadow. Ever since yesterday's career day disaster, the teasing had been relentless. "Ignore them," whispered Dion, the only friend who'd stood by him. "They're just jealous, 'cause all their brothers do is play video games in their parents' basements." But the jokes continued as they walked toward the bus loop. "NASA, huh? Never apply space administration. Maybe he'll discover planet make-believe." Marcus clutched the straps of his backpack tighter. What stung most wasn't the ridicule but the assumption that he was lying. In the 15 years of his life, Marcus had never been a liar. His mother had raised him and Mateusz with one unbreakable rule: your word is your bond. Break it, and trust breaks with it. The city bus pulled up to the curb with a hydraulic sigh. As Marcus climbed aboard, he thought about Mateusz, 19 years his senior, more father figure than brother since their dad had passed when Marcus was just 3. While their mother worked double shifts as a nurse, it was Mateusz who'd attended parent-teacher conferences, who'd taught Marcus to ride a bike, who'd nurtured his interest in science. It was Mateusz who'd given him his first telescope on his 10th birthday, a refurbished Celestron that had changed everything. The stars don't care where you come from, little man, he'd said that night as they'd gazed at Jupiter's moons. They only care if you're looking up. 40 minutes later, Marcus unlocked the apartment door and headed straight to his bedroom, a converted storage space barely large enough for his twin bed and desk. The walls were covered with printouts of NASA mission patches and cosmic phenomena. Above his bed hung his most prized possession, a framed photo of Mateusz at JPL, standing beside the Mars Perseverance rover before its launch. His phone buzzed with a text notification. Mateusz, mission debrief running late. Pizza money on the counter. Call you tonight. Marcus texted back a thumbs-up emoji, disappointment mixing with understanding. Mateusz's classified work meant long absences and irregular communication. The distance was hard, but Marcus understood the importance of his brother's work. He pulled out his battered copy of Astrophysics for Young People in a Hurry by Neil deGrasse Tyson, the pages dog-eared and highlighted. Dr. Tyson, like Mateusz, had become a beacon, proof that black men belonged among the stars. Later that evening, as Marcus worked on his science fair project, he wondered what Ms. Whitfield would say if she knew the truth, that Mateusz Johnson wasn't just at NASA, but was one of their leading engineers on deep space propulsion systems. That he had 3 patents and a PhD from MIT. That he'd helped design the very rover currently rolling across Mars. But people like Ms. Whitfield saw what they expected to see. And in Marcus Johnson, she saw limits, not possibilities. Little did she know, the Johnson brothers had a history of shattering expectations. Mr. Johnson, perhaps you'd like to explain to the class why your answer differs from the textbook. Ms. Whitfield's voice cut through the classroom like a scalpel. It was the 3rd time this week she'd singled Marcus out, and it was only Wednesday. Since career day, her scrutiny had intensified, as if she were personally offended by his existence in her advanced placement physics class. Marcus glanced down at his work, double-checking his calculations. The textbook uses the simplified equation for gravitational force, ma'am. But for objects approaching relativistic speeds, you need to account for the Lorentz factor. A heavy silence fell over the classroom. Ms. Whitfield's eyes narrowed behind her designer frames as she approached his desk, her heels clicking a steady rhythm on the linoleum floor. And where, exactly, did you learn about the Lorentz factor? It's well beyond our curriculum. Her tone suggested she'd caught him in some kind of academic fraud. My brother explained it to me during our last video call. He uses these calculations for trajectory planning. Marcus met her gaze steadily, though his heart hammered in his chest. Ms. Whitfield's perfectly painted lips twitched. Ah yes, your brother. The NASA engineer. She didn't bother hiding her disbelief as she turned to address the class. While creative thinking is valuable, students, standardized testing requires standardized answers. Please stick to the methods outlined in your approved textbooks. As she walked away, Marcus heard Tyler whisper, "Guess NASA doesn't teach you to follow directions, huh?" Later, as students filed out after the bell, Ms. Whitfield called Marcus to stay behind. She waited until they were alone before speaking. Marcus, I've been teaching for nearly 3 decades. I've seen thousands of students pass through my classroom. Some exceptional, most average, and a few. She paused, eyeing him critically, who overcompensate for their circumstances with elaborate fantasies. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. My brother does work at NASA, Ms. Whitfield. She sighed, removing her glasses to massage the bridge of her nose. Do you know why I became a science teacher, Marcus? Because science demands evidence. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. She leaned against her desk. I grew up in Manchester, New Hampshire. My father was a university dean, my mother a biochemist. Education was non-negotiable in our household. Marcus remained silent, unsure why she was sharing her life story. I earned my degrees through hard work and sacrifice, she continued. No shortcuts, no handouts. That's how success works in the real world. Her eyes hardened. So when a student from Eastside, with no apparent academic pedigree in his family, claims his brother works on classified NASA missions, you can understand my skepticism. The implication was clear, and it made Marcus's blood boil. People like him weren't supposed to reach those heights. My brother graduated summa cum laude from MIT, Marcus said quietly. He was recruited to JPL before he even defended his dissertation. He doesn't talk about it much because most of his work is classified. Ms. Whitfield's laugh was soft but cutting. MIT to NASA. How convenient that it's all so impressive yet so unverifiable. What she didn't know, what Marcus couldn't tell her without breaking his promise to Mateusz, was that his brother's low profile was intentional. After a serious security breach at JPL 3 years ago, Mateusz and several colleagues had been advised to minimize their digital footprints. Mateusz had even removed himself from social media and professional networking sites. The science fair is in 3 weeks, Ms. Whitfield said, changing tack abruptly. Since you seem to possess such advanced knowledge, I've taken the liberty of signing you up for the senior division. You'll be competing against students from the entire district, including Lawrence Preparatory. Lawrence Prep, the private school across town where tuition cost more than their apartment. Your project proposal is due Friday. She handed him a form. I suggest something suitably ambitious for someone with NASA connections. As Marcus left the classroom, he understood the challenge for what it was, a trap designed to expose him as a fraud. Ms. Whitfield expected him to fail, to prove her assumptions correct. What she didn't understand was that Marcus Johnson had grown up watching his brother defy expectations. Mateusz had navigated a world that constantly questioned his belonging, his intelligence, his right to dream beyond assigned boundaries. He'd done it with dignity, excellence, and an unwavering focus on the work itself. Now it was Marcus's turn. That evening, as he researched potential science fair projects, his phone lit up with a video call request. Mateusz's tired face appeared on screen, the white walls of what appeared to be a hotel room visible behind him. Hey, little brother, Mateusz smiled, the familiar constellation of freckles crinkling around his eyes. Sorry I've been MIA. How's school? Marcus hesitated, torn between unburdening himself and protecting his brother from worry. But the Johnson rule of honesty prevailed. I need your help, Mateusz, he admitted. I've got something to prove. Jupiter's atmospheric dynamics. Ms. Whitfield's eyebrows shot up as she reviewed Marcus's project proposal. Her reading glasses perched precariously on the tip of her nose as she scanned the detailed outline. This is rather ambitious. The classroom was empty except for them, Friday afternoon sunshine streaming through the windows. Marcus stood tall, his science fair proposal meticulously prepared after 3 nights of intensive research and 2-hour-long video calls with Mateusz. I believe it's appropriate for the senior division, ma'am, Marcus replied evenly. Ms. Whitfield's mouth tightened. You understand you'll be competing against students who have access to university laboratories. Lawrence Prep has a partnership with State University's physics department. I understand. She set the proposal down and folded her hands. Your model proposes to demonstrate the interaction between Jupiter's belts and zones, including the Great Red Spot's dynamics. How exactly do you plan to construct this without advanced fluid dynamics equipment? Marcus had anticipated this question. I'll build a rotating tank system with concentric cylinders to simulate different rotation speeds. The differential rotation will demonstrate the formation of the bands. For the Great Red Spot, I'll use a combination of temperature gradients and vorticity principles. Something flickered across Ms. Whitfield's face, surprise, perhaps even a hint of respect, before her expression hardened again. Very well. Proposal accepted. She signed the form with a flourish. I'll be interested to see if the execution matches this elaborate description. As Marcus turned to leave, Tyler and several other students entered for after-school help. Tyler smirked, nudging his friend. "Hey NASA boy, building a rocket ship for the science fair." Ms. Whitfield didn't reprimand him. Instead, she called out, "Marcus has chosen to model Jupiter's atmospheric dynamics for the senior division competition." The announcement had the desired effect. The students exchanged glances, snickers following. Tyler's eyes widened in mock astonishment. "Wow, sounds complex. But I guess when your brother works for NASA, you get all the insider secrets, right?" His voice dripped with sarcasm. "The project will be completed independently, without outside assistance," Ms. Whitfield added pointedly. "As per competition rules." The implication was clear: either Marcus would fail on his own, or he'd cheat and be disqualified. Either way, Ms. Whitfield expected vindication. Walking home that afternoon, Marcus felt the weight of the challenge he'd accepted. The science fair was only 3 weeks away. He'd need materials, time, and precision to pull this off. The budget would be tight. His mother was working double shifts at the hospital this month to cover last month's unexpected car repairs. His phone buzzed with a text from Dion, "Lawrence Prep kids doing quantum physics for Sci-Fair. You sure about Jupiter?" Marcus typed back, "Too late now. Already approved." Dion responded with a gif of someone diving into empty space. Marcus smiled despite himself. At home, he cleared his small desk and began sketching the contraption he'd envisioned. 2 concentric cylinders with a fluid chamber between them. The inner cylinder would rotate at one speed, the outer at another. The differential rotation would create bands similar to Jupiter's atmospheric features. For hours, he worked on calculations, material lists, and construction plans. His mother peeked in around midnight, still in her nurse's scrubs. "Baby, you need to sleep," she said, her voice gentle but concerned. "Almost done, Mom." She studied the papers spread across his desk. "This looks complicated." "It's for the science fair. Senior division." Pride flashed in her tired eyes. "Just like your brother. Always reaching for the stars." She kissed his forehead. "Don't stay up too late. Even rocket scientists need sleep." After she left, Marcus pulled out his phone and looked at the most recent photo Mateusz had sent, a selfie taken in what appeared to be a control room, screens glowing with data behind him. His brother's face showed the weariness of long hours but also unmistakable satisfaction. Marcus added the photo to his growing project folder. Not as reference material, he would respect the rules and complete this project independently, but as a reminder of what was possible. If Mateusz could navigate the stars, Marcus could weather a high school science fair, even with Ms. Whitfield as judge, jury, and potential executioner of his academic reputation. "You're sure about this project?" Mateusz's voice came through Marcus's earbuds, tinged with both concern and pride. The video call showed his brother in what appeared to be a hotel room, the bedside lamp casting shadows across his tired face. Despite the late hour, nearly midnight in California, where Mateusz was currently based, he'd made time for their call. "I've already started building the rotation mechanism," Marcus replied, adjusting his phone to show the partially constructed apparatus on his desk. "Found some old computer cooling fans at the electronics recycling center. Mr. Rodriguez at the hardware store helped me cut the acrylic cylinders." Mateusz leaned closer to his screen, his eyes narrowing as he studied Marcus's creation. At 42, Mateusz Johnson carried himself with the quiet dignity that came from navigating spaces where he was often the only black man in the room. His close-cropped hair showed specks of premature gray, earned through physics-defying feats of engineering, as he liked to joke. "The inner rotation looks good," Mateusz observed. "But you'll need precise control of both cylinders to create the banded effect. Have you considered using a microcontroller?" Marcus nodded. "Arduino. I saved up from mowing Mr. Wilson's lawn." A smile spread across Mateusz's face. "That's my little brother. Always finding a way." The pride in his voice was unmistakable. For the next hour, they discussed fluid dynamics, rotation rates, and visualization techniques. Though Mateus was careful not to solve problems for Marcus, his guiding questions helped clarify the approach. "So this teacher," Mateus said eventually, rubbing his eyes. "The one who doesn't believe I exist. What's her deal?" Marcus hesitated. He'd been selective in what he shared about Ms. Whitfield's behavior, not wanting to burden his brother with problems he couldn't solve from 3,000 miles away. "She has expectations about who can succeed in science," Marcus finally answered. "And I don't fit them." Understanding darkened Mateus's expression. He didn't need elaboration, he'd faced similar prejudices throughout his career. "You know," Mateus said quietly, "when I first started at JPL, a senior engineer assumed I was IT support. When I explained I was the new propulsion specialist, he laughed and asked if I'd gotten lost." "What did you do?" Marcus asked, though he'd heard variations of this story before. "I designed a more efficient thruster system that's currently pushing a spacecraft toward Jupiter as we speak." Mateus's smile held no bitterness, only a serene confidence. "Excellence is the best response to doubt, little brother." Mateus shifted in his seat, and for the first time, Marcus noticed the NASA security badge still clipped to his shirt pocket. The conversation drifted to Mateus's current project, as much as he could share about the classified mission. "We're working on something that could revolutionize deep space exploration," Mateus said, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten as excitement animated his features. "Can't give details, but let's just say the physics would blow your mind." "Is that why you've been so hard to reach lately?" Marcus asked. Guilt flickered across Mateus's face. "Yeah. Final testing phase. Critical timeline." He paused. "But it's almost done. In fact." He seemed to consider something, checking his phone calendar. "The project presentation is scheduled for the 18th. When did you say your science fair was?" "The 19th. Something sparked in Mateus's eyes. "Interesting timing." "What do you mean?" "Nothing concrete yet," Mateus replied enigmatically. "Let me check some things first." "But maybe." He trailed off, then shook his head. "Never mind. Focus on your project. Make it airtight. I know you can do this." As they prepared to end the call, Mateus grew serious. "Marcus, about Ms. Whitfield, people like that have been telling people like us what we can't do for generations. The stars don't care where you're from, remember? They only care if you're looking up," Marcus finished, echoing the mantra they'd shared since his first telescope. After hanging up, Marcus returned to his project with renewed determination. The conversation had left him with questions about Mateus's mysterious schedule, but one thing was certain: both Johnson brothers had something to prove, and neither would back down from the challenge. Outside his window, Jupiter itself hung bright in the night sky, a distant witness to the quiet determination unfolding in a small apartment bedroom, where dreams of space transcended earthly limitations. The apartment was silent except for the soft whir of cooling fans and the occasional click of the rotational mechanism. Marcus checked his watch, 2:17 a.m. The science fair was less than 12 hours away, and his project still wasn't cooperating. The basic structure was complete: 2 concentric acrylic cylinders mounted on a platform, with a fluid-filled chamber between them. The inner and outer cylinders rotated at different speeds, controlled by the Arduino board he'd programmed. In theory, this differential rotation should create banded patterns similar to Jupiter's atmospheric features. In practice, the patterns kept dissolving into chaos. "Come on," Marcus muttered, adjusting the rotation speed for the 12th time that night. "Work with me here, Jupiter." His eyes burned from exhaustion. 3 weeks of after-school construction, late-night programming, and weekend testing had consumed him. He'd poured every available penny into this project, even selling his collection of vintage astronomy magazines to buy the special rheoscopic fluid that would make the flow patterns visible. His mother had left a plate of dinner by his door hours ago, now cold and untouched. She understood his drive; it mirrored Mateus's intense focus during his own school days. The Johnson persistence, she called it. Stubborn as stars. As the fluid began to form faint bands, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text. Mateus. Still up. Marcus typed back, Project Emergency. Bands won't stabilize. 3 dots appeared as Mateus typed his response, check thermal gradient. Even small temperature differences can disrupt flow. Marcus frowned, then touched the outer cylinder. It was warmer than the inner one, thanks to the friction from the belt drive. That could be causing convection currents that disrupted the banded patterns. He quickly fashioned an improvised cooling sleeve from a wet towel for the outer cylinder and adjusted the rotation speeds. Within minutes, distinct bands began to form in the blue-tinted fluid, swirling into stable patterns. When he introduced a small heat source at one point, simulating the thermal conditions that help maintain Jupiter's great red spot, a perfect vortex formed and held its position. Yes. Marcus pumped his fist in the air, nearly knocking over his desk lamp. He quickly recorded a video of the working model and sent it to Mateus. Mateus responded with a series of fire emojis, followed by, get some sleep. Tomorrow you make history. But sleep seemed impossible now. Marcus sat back in his chair, watching the hypnotic rotation of his creation. The swirling patterns reminded him of the first time he'd seen Jupiter through Mateus's telescope, the moment his brother's passion had become his own. His gaze drifted to the framed photo of Mateus at JPL. People like Ms. Whitfield couldn't comprehend the journey his brother had traveled, from a curious boy in a single-parent home to an aerospace engineer sending spacecraft into the cosmos. They couldn't see past their assumptions, their neat categories of who belonged where. Those assumptions had followed Mateus through MIT, where professors mistook him for janitorial staff. They'd followed him to his first industry job, where colleagues attributed his success to diversity initiatives, rather than brilliant engineering. They'd followed him to JPL, where security sometimes stopped him for additional ID checks while waving through his white colleagues. Yet Mateus had persevered, letting excellence be his answer to doubt. The work speaks for itself, he often told Marcus. Make your work so good they can't ignore it. As dawn broke over the city, Marcus finally allowed himself a few hours of sleep, the completed Jupiter model safely covered on his desk. Whatever happened at the science fair, he'd built something remarkable, not just a model of Jupiter's atmosphere, but a testament to the Johnson family legacy of reaching beyond imposed limitations. Tomorrow, his work would speak for itself. The school gymnasium buzzed with activity as students arranged their projects along the rows of tables. Large banners proclaimed, 44th Annual District Science Fair, in bold blue letters, while judges in white lab coats circulated with clipboards, stopping occasionally to question nervous participants. Marcus carefully transported his Jupiter model through the crowded space, drawing curious glances from other competitors. The Lawrence Prep students were easy to spot, their matching navy blazers setting them apart as they hovered around sophisticated displays with glossy printed materials. "Whoa, that actually looks legit," Dion said, appearing at Marcus's side to help him set up. "You really pulled it off." "Almost didn't," Marcus admitted, settling his creation on the assigned table. "Had a flow stability crisis at 2 a.m. As they arranged the project, Mr. Abernathy, the head of science for the district, approached with Ms. Whitfield trailing behind him. The elderly African-American man's eyes lit up at the sight of Marcus's model. "Fascinating approach to demonstrating planetary atmospherics," Mr. Abernathy remarked, leaning closer to observe the banded patterns. "Is that a rheoscopic fluid chamber?" "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, surprised by the recognition. The differential rotation creates the banded appearance, similar to Jupiter's belt and zone system. Ms. Whitfield's expression remained neutral, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "Marcus has quite the fascination with NASA-level projects," she commented. "His claimed influences are exceptionally lofty." Mr. Abernathy didn't seem to register the subtle undermining. "Well, ambition drives innovation. Looking forward to your presentation later, young man." As they moved on to the next project, Dion whistled low. "Ms. Whitfield really has it out for you." "She thinks I'm a fraud," Marcus said, making final adjustments to the rotation speed. "She's been waiting 3 weeks to prove it." Throughout the morning, students presented their projects to rotating panels of judges. Marcus watched as Lawrence Prep competitors demonstrated complex experiments with polished confidence. One team had built a functioning quantum encryption system, another had developed biodegradable plastics from agricultural waste. When Marcus's turn came, he found himself facing a panel that included Ms. Whitfield, Mr. Abernathy, and a physics professor from State University. The crowd around his table had grown, curious about the swirling blue patterns in his cylindrical apparatus. This project demonstrates the fluid dynamics that create Jupiter's distinctive atmospheric bands, Marcus began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. The differential rotation between these cylinders creates shear forces in the fluid, forming stable bands similar to Jupiter's belt and zone system. As he activated the heating element, a perfect vortex formed in the southern hemisphere of his model. This represents the Great Red Spot, a storm system that has persisted for centuries due to specific thermal and rotational conditions that I've replicated here. The university professor leaned forward, clearly impressed. The correlation to actual Jovian dynamics is remarkable. How did you determine the rotational differential needed to maintain band stability? For 40 minutes, Marcus fielded increasingly complex questions, drawing on everything he'd learned during late nights of research and his discussions with Mateusz. The crowd around his table grew, including students from Lawrence Prep who watched with reluctant admiration. When the physics professor suggested that Marcus's model could be useful for undergraduate demonstrations, Ms. Whitfield finally intervened. While impressive in appearance, she said, her voice carrying through the now quiet gymnasium, I must question how a sophomore student developed such advanced fluid dynamics knowledge independently. She turned directly to Marcus. Perhaps you had some special assistance. From your NASA connection, perhaps. The implication hung in the air. Marcus felt his cheeks burn, aware that everyone, judges, teachers, competitors, was watching this confrontation. I followed competition rules, Ms. Whitfield, he replied evenly. All work is my own. Indeed. Her skepticism was palpable. Then perhaps you could explain the derivation of the thermal gradient equations you've implemented. That's graduate-level fluid dynamics. As Marcus opened his mouth to respond, a deep voice from the back of the crowd answered instead. Those would be the Navier-Stokes equations, modified for rotating reference frames. The crowd parted as a tall figure moved toward the front. The gymnasium fell silent as Mateusz Johnson strode toward Marcus's display. At 6'2", with broad shoulders and impeccable posture, Mateusz commanded attention without effort. His charcoal suit was perfectly tailored, the NASA insignia visible on his ID badge that hung from a lanyard around his neck. The years of weightlessness training and rigorous physical conditioning for space-adjacent work were evident in his athletic build. Ms. Whitfield's mouth opened slightly, then closed again as Mateusz stopped beside Marcus's table. The resemblance between the brothers was unmistakable, the same determined eyes, the same constellations of freckles across their noses, the same quiet dignity in their bearing. Dr. Mateusz Johnson, he introduced himself, extending his hand to the wide-eyed judges. Senior Aerospace Engineer, NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And Marcus's brother. Mr. Abernathy recovered first, taking Mateusz's offered hand. Dr. Johnson, what an unexpected pleasure. Are you here in an official capacity? Personal visit, Mateusz replied with a warm smile. Though I couldn't miss seeing my brother's project. We Johnsons have a thing for Jupiter. His gaze swept over Marcus's model, professional appreciation evident in his eyes. Excellent implementation of differential rotation principles. The visualization of the Great Red Spot's persistence is particularly impressive. Ms. Whitfield had gone perfectly still, her clipboard clutched so tightly her knuckles had whitened. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a brittle quality. You're claiming to be Marcus's brother? The one who works for NASA. Mateusz turned to her, recognition flickering in his eyes as Marcus had undoubtedly described her. I don't claim anything, ma'am. I am Marcus's brother, and I do indeed work for NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a business card with the NASA logo, which he handed to her with practiced courtesy. The university professor leaned forward with sudden excitement. Dr. Johnson. I've read your paper on propulsion dynamics for the Europa mission. Groundbreaking work. Thank you, Mateusz acknowledged with a modest nod. Though I'm here as a proud brother today, not a NASA representative. Students had begun frantically Googling on their phones, whispers spreading as search results confirmed Mateusz's identity. Several Lawrence Prep students pushed forward, questions about aerospace engineering already forming on their lips. Tyler stood frozen at the edge of the crowd, his expression caught between disbelief and embarrassment as he stared at the NASA badge hanging from Mateusz's neck. Ms. Whitfield seemed to shrink slightly under Mateusz's steady gaze. We had no verification of your existence, she managed, her voice unnaturally high. Marcus's claims seemed implausible. Mateusz finished for her, his tone pleasant but his eyes sharp. That assumptions often say more about the observer than the observed. He turned back to Marcus's project, deliberately shifting the focus. Now, about this model, you've managed to create a self-sustaining vortex system that's remarkably analogous to Jupiter's actual atmospheric behavior. His words, spoken with authority, transformed what had been a moment of confrontation into an educational opportunity. The university professor eagerly joined in, questions about fluid dynamics and planetary atmospheres flowing freely. Students clustered closer, phones recording the impromptu master class from a NASA engineer. Throughout it all, Ms. Whitfield stood rigidly to the side, the reality of her misjudgment settling upon her shoulders as she watched Mateusz effortlessly command the respect she had worked decades to cultivate. Marcus caught his brother's eye across the table, exchanging a silent message of gratitude and triumph. His brother gave him an almost imperceptible nod, acknowledging both Marcus's achievement and the broader significance of this moment, a moment when assumptions were being publicly dismantled, when excellence spoke for itself. As the judging panel prepared to move on to the next presentation, Mateusz placed a supportive hand on Marcus's shoulder, the gesture noticed by everyone watching. I believe, Mr. Abernathy said, looking pointedly at Ms. Whitfield, we have some reconsidering to do regarding our initial assessment of this project. If you'll permit me, Mateusz said, addressing the science fair organizers who had gathered around during the commotion, I'd like to offer some context about the scientific principles demonstrated in my brother's project. Principal Watkins, a gray-haired woman who had rushed to the scene after hearing about the NASA engineer's unexpected appearance, nodded eagerly. Of course, Dr. Johnson. We'd be honored. Ms. Whitfield had retreated to the edge of the circle, her expression unreadable as she watched her carefully constructed worldview crumble around her. The Lawrence Prep teachers had moved closer, suddenly interested in the student they had dismissed moments earlier. Mateusz gestured to the fluid-filled cylinders. What Marcus has created here is not just a school project, it's a working fluid dynamics model that we use similar versions of at JPL for atmospheric studies. His deep voice carried effortlessly through the now hushed gymnasium. The principles demonstrated here are the same ones that inform our understanding of gas giant atmospheric behavior. He touched the outer cylinder gently. The differential rotation creates Taylor-Couette flow patterns that mirror Jupiter's bands. The thermal gradient introduction, he pointed to the heating element Marcus had incorporated, brilliantly simulates the conditions that create and maintain the Great Red Spot. The university professor nodded vigorously. Undergraduate students in my fluid dynamics course struggle with creating stable vortices in their lab work. This implementation is remarkably elegant. Marcus stood straighter, years of doubt and dismissal falling away under the weight of this professional validation. From the corner of his eye, he could see Dion recording everything on his phone, a huge grin splitting his face. What most people don't realize, Mateusz continued, seamlessly shifting into the educator role he occasionally filled at JPL's public outreach events, is that understanding these atmospheric dynamics isn't just academic. The same principles inform our mission planning for probes entering Jupiter's atmosphere, like the Galileo atmospheric probe did years ago, and as future missions will. He turned to the students who had gathered. Science builds upon itself. The same equations that describe why your coffee forms that swirl when you stir it help us navigate spacecraft through the atmospheres of distant planets. Principal Watkins stepped forward. Dr. Johnson, may I ask what brings you to our science fair today? Was it specifically to see your brother's project? Mateusz smiled. Partially. I've just completed a 3-year classified project at JPL yesterday, the final phase of developing propulsion systems for our next generation of deep space explorers. The timing allowed me to fly in this morning. He looked at Marcus with unmistakable pride. I wouldn't have missed this for anything. Ms. Whitfield finally found her voice. Dr. Johnson, she began, her usual confidence noticeably diminished. Why isn't there more public information about your work? When I searched security protocols, Mateusz answered simply. After the cybersecurity incident at JPL in 2021, several of us working on classified propulsion systems were advised to maintain minimal digital footprints. National security concerns. He said this matter-of-factly, without embellishment. The explanation hung in the air, making Ms. Whitfield's skepticism seem not just unfair but unpatriotic. Her cheeks colored visibly. Marcus tells me you've been his science teacher for 2 years now, Mateusz continued, his tone conversational but his eyes intent. He mentions your emphasis on rigorous standards and evidence-based conclusions. Yes, Ms. Whitfield managed, recognizing the trap but unable to avoid it. I believe in maintaining high academic standards. As do I, Mateusz agreed. Which is why I'm particularly impressed with what Marcus has accomplished here, working with limited resources and, his gaze briefly sharpened, limited encouragement. The university professor, oblivious to the tension, jumped in enthusiastically. Young man, have you considered early college applications? Our physics department has a special admission track for exceptional students. Before Marcus could answer, Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat. I believe we should conclude the formal judging portion. Dr. Johnson, would you be willing to say a few words to all our participants before the awards ceremony? Your perspective would be invaluable. I'd be happy to, Mateusz agreed. As the crowd began to disperse, Ms. Whitfield approached Marcus, her composure somewhat regained. Your project is quite impressive, Marcus. I may have underestimated your capabilities. The words fell far short of an apology, but Marcus recognized the effort it took for her to say even this much. Thank you, Ms. Whitfield, he replied evenly. I'm glad I had the opportunity to demonstrate what I can do. The exchange was interrupted as Mateusz returned to Marcus's side after speaking with the principal. Marcus, they've asked me to present the awards later. Hope that's not too embarrassing for you, he said with a wink. As they stood together beside the Jupiter model, the brothers represented a continuum of achievement, one established in his field, one just beginning his journey, both defying the limitations others had tried to impose upon them. The truth had been revealed, not just about Mateusz's career, but about the assumptions that had clouded Ms. Whitfield's judgment, assumptions that had perhaps clouded her view of many students over her long career. For Marcus, the victory wasn't just about vindication. It was about visibility, for himself, for his brother, and for every student who had ever been underestimated because of who they were or where they came from. 1 month after the science fair, Ms. Whitfield's classroom looked different. The walls, once adorned only with periodic tables and physics principles, now featured photographs of diverse scientists throughout history. Most prominently displayed was a framed picture of Marcus with his first-place trophy, standing proudly beside his Jupiter model. As we conclude our unit on gravitational physics, Ms. Whitfield addressed her class, I'd like to announce an extraordinary opportunity. The students, noticeably more attentive than before, looked up from their notebooks. Thanks to arrangements made by Dr. Mateusz Johnson, our class has been invited to tour the Jet Propulsion Laboratory next month. Excited murmurs rippled through the room. Tyler, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since the science fair, raised his hand. Will we get to see actual spacecraft being built? Yes, Ms. Whitfield nodded. Dr. Johnson has arranged special access to areas normally restricted to visitors. Marcus sat quietly at his desk, still processing the changes of the past month. His science fair victory had transformed his standing at school. More significantly, the district superintendent had launched an evaluation of teaching practices after learning how Ms. Whitfield had treated him. The teacher herself had undergone a visible transformation. The formal disciplinary review had been humbling, but what seemed to affect her more deeply was the realization of how her biases had shaped her interactions with students, particularly those from backgrounds different from her own. After class, Ms. Whitfield asked Marcus to stay behind. "I received this today," she said, handing him an envelope bearing the State University logo. Inside was an acceptance letter to their summer science immersion program, typically reserved for juniors and seniors. "The professor who judged your project recommended you," she explained. "They're offering a full scholarship." Marcus stared at the letter, emotions conflicting within him. "Thank you for sharing this." Ms. Whitfield hesitated, then spoke with uncharacteristic vulnerability. "I've been teaching for nearly 3 decades, Marcus. I thought I was upholding standards. I didn't recognize I was enforcing limitations." She met his eyes directly. "I was wrong about you. I suspect I've been wrong about many students over the years." The admission clearly cost her, but there was relief in her expression too, the unburdening that comes with acknowledging a fundamental error. "What you and your brother have accomplished," she continued, "it's forced me to question assumptions I didn't even know I held." Later that evening, as Marcus shared the university acceptance news with Mateus via video call, his brother's face broke into a wide smile. "First step toward JPL," Mateus said proudly. "Though you might surpass me yet." "I don't know about that," Marcus laughed. "I do," Mateus replied with certainty. "The stars don't care where you're from, they only care if you're looking up," Marcus finished. As they talked about the upcoming JPL tour, Marcus reflected on how a moment of public humiliation had transformed into something powerful, not just validation for himself, but perhaps the beginning of change for students who would come after him. Some horizons expanded quietly in classroom moments. Others opened dramatically, like doors swinging wide to reveal the vastness of space itself. All required the courage to look up and reach beyond the limitations others imposed. Dear friend, what we see in others often reflects our own assumptions rather than their potential. When we limit someone's dreams based on their background, appearance, or circumstances, we're not seeing them, we're seeing our own biases. Like stars in the night sky, brilliance exists everywhere, waiting to be recognized. Our responsibility is not just to reach for our own dreams but to create a world where everyone's aspirations are taken seriously. If this story touched your heart, like and subscribe for more content that challenges perceptions and celebrates hidden excellence in unexpected places.